Hey guys, Bidu here to tell you about the latest from Autopsy, Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts on October 27th on Peaceville Records. The album has 11 tracks, 41 minutes in length, and this is the band's 9th full-length studio album. They are an American death metal band. Now, coming into this record, I was expecting an album that's very compact, very balanced and cohesive, where all the songs kind of have a similar attitude, a similar sonic experience, almost becoming very hard to tell the forest from the trees when you get to song number 11. It was not the case. The album's a lot more dynamic than I was expecting, sometimes subtle in its dynamic movements, but dynamic nevertheless. Alternating styles, or at least alternating pockets of style, so you don't get 3 songs in a row that have similar characteristics from a structure point of view, but also from a sonic point of view. All of this making the album feel a lot more engaging, a lot more fluid, a lot more dynamic, definitely increasing the playability of the record as a whole, taking from the playability that the individual songs already have. Going into the sound, this album definitely has the death metal aroma to it, but it's not your prototypical one-size-fits-all death metal sounding record. There's a lot more to give with this album. I feel like it's almost a little bit of conglomeration of all the different attitudes, all the different sounds, all the different experiences that death metal have to offer, specifically more American death metal in terms of what you get from southern bands versus what you get from bands from the Midwest or bands from New York or bands from LA. There's a little bit of everything that it is death metal on this record, and they're not afraid of trying different styles, different approaches, and then obviously different structures. You also have a little bit of grindcore at times, specifically in the shorter tracks, or at least in some of the shorter tracks, like Toxic Death Fuck. That song definitely has a grindcore experience to it. But when you look at the overall sound and how much the bass comes through, there's definitely a technical element to this record that kind of becomes the spinal cord, or at least the fingerprint sound of the entire album. It's impossible to listen to this record and not see the impact that the bass has on the experience, how technical it becomes, and how subtle it is at times and not so subtle at others. But it definitely becomes that fingerprint that differentiates this album from a death metal perspective from those around it. It allows the bass to play a predominant role on every single song, but not to the point that the album becomes over technical. It has the death metal, the straightforward death metal sound and production behind it. The bass popping kind of creates this other nuance to it that infuses that technicality into the experience without going overboard. It's still through and through a death metal record, just a death metal record that uses other influences in order to ignite a more dynamic and a more rich sound experience. Outside of the bass, you have to talk about the guitars. I honestly really enjoyed the guitar sound on this record, from the distortion that they have, but not to the point of pushing in a more fuzzy experience, which would throw this album really into this old school throwback, almost like mixtape approach. This album doesn't have that style, it doesn't have that production. The sound does have some distortion at times, but it's a different kind of old school. It's, like I said, more American death metal, old school sounding record versus an European old school death metal sounding album. And the life that the guitars have, specifically in the solos, definitely breaks away from the overall heaviness and intensity of the album. Those solo sections have a different aroma. They allow you to see the guitars differently. They allow you to have pockets within the tracks that it doesn't matter how heavy, how methodic, or how fast this heavy sound is coming at you. Those solo sections always give you a room and give you a space to have some clarity, even when they are over the top, even when they are connected with the overall flow and tempo of the song. You still feel like the melody and the sound and how they infuse themselves in the overall design of the songs definitely gives the listener a little bit of a reprieve from everything else that was around it. So I honestly enjoy the impact of the guitar sound on the record, and then the guitar sound that the solos offer. The drums have a full sound to them. They're not overpowering, they're not over the top. They're also not necessarily grounding the record. They allow the sound to have movement, so they're not overly heavy and grounding the overall experience of this album sound-wise, but I felt like they had substance within them. They don't feel hollow. They feel like they add texture to the overall sound. They add texture to what the guitars are putting forward, and they're a perfect partner to connect that more distorted guitar sound at times with that more, not simplistic, but clean bass sound that pops so much throughout the entire album. Now, once it comes into the vocals are consistent, but that doesn't mean that it's just one single approach. I like that there are some songs on this record where you see the vocals going a little bit deeper, a little bit lower. It matches the movement, it matches the mood of the tracks. It allows the songs to have a more of a sense of uniqueness to them, even though they may not changing a lot musically. Changing ever so slight where you are on your register as far as the vocals are concerned is more than enough to differentiate a track to another track and change the eyesight of the listener. I honestly feel like the biggest strength of this record, it's its subtle diversity. It's definitely a record that feels like a death metal album, sounds like a death metal album, but it doesn't get boring because it's not the same death metal album song in and song out, and that is its biggest strength. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with No Mortal Left Alive. This is a death metal track that starts slow, actually has this fade in effect. It starts from nothing and it starts to fade in into the track. The volume starts to increase. Interestingly enough, it ends off with a fade out. So I love songs that have this ability to have a beginning and an end, like two bookends that really make the track feel perfect, make the track feel complete. Now, as the movement of the sound becomes, you can see that the track has this, great tempo, really heavy flow to it. It's a track that uses the guitars to create heaviness, but then it also uses the guitars, specifically the more penetrating riffs, in order to break through some of that heaviness. Now, the bass helps define the tempo. It helps define the movement. Pops a lot, but that could be said about every track on this album. More in one, less in the other, but on this one it really pops, and it really helps define that movement that the track has within it. It has a great solo section, and then you return to this old school feeling of sinking in. It's a track that has certain pockets where you feel like you're being dragged down, and then it has pockets where you feel like you're liberated from it, and the song is moving forward. Once you enter the last third, you start to feel the track going full circle. You start to feel that bass once again coming in. You can feel the impact of it, and then you have the fade out at the end. It's a very complete track with ebbs and flows built in within, great guitar playing, and then that bass that obviously becomes a huge part of the sound, not just of the song, but of the entire record. Next you have Toxic Death Fuck. I mentioned this song before. It has a little bit of a grindcore, a little bit of a punk aroma to it, in sound, in style, in design, obviously in length. Is a short track, less than 3 minutes. So it has all of those elements going forward, and when you have all of those elements going forward, you create really a very intense and a very aggressive song that always feels like it's right on top of you. The bass is still there, but the bass feels a little bit more contained, feels a little bit more underlined as far as the overall sound is concerned. The solo section is really good, and that surprised me because I was expecting this song not to have that much of a solo, considering the length, the structure, the style, and the overall approach. But you have a track where the guitars really play a major role, and then you have the bass creating a little bit of depth and infusing a little bit of technicality at times into a very chaotic, or at least very pungent song all around. Like I said, it has a little bit of a grindcore vibe to it, and that's undeniable in terms of the experience that you get out of it. As far as my last favorite song, I shouldn't say my last favorite song, but my third song that I put on my list as far as favorite tracks are concerned, I have Lobotomizing Gods. Now, this is a track that has this slow movement to it, almost like a grinding movement to it, and you have guitars, bass, and drums really well layered and really well defined throughout. The vocals come in deeper and darker than the track that came before, and definitely than the track that comes after, and that helps set the song apart. Just with that element, you start to feel like this is a different song. When you have that deeper vocal approach, when you have that slow movement of the song, that grinding, like you're sinking into the track, it gives you a different experience. It adds a level of darkness that makes the heaviness of the track feel even heavier because it's also very dark surrounding it. Now there are some jolts within this song of intensity where you feel like the track suddenly picks up some steam, but overall it always finds a way to go back to that more grinding effect that becomes the calling card of the entire track. Having the solo sections also work as bursts works really well for a track like this, but it always comes down to that grinding effect, the guitar sound through it, and that deeper vocals that definitely offers a much higher level of darkness to a track that sets itself apart mostly because of how the vocals come across. This is it. Autopsy, Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts, out October 27th on Peaceville Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.